The salt air, thick and cloying, clung to me like a shroud. It wasn't the bracing, invigorating kind of sea breeze I read about in adventure novels. This was the stagnant breath of something that had been submerged too long, a decay that the endless churn of the ocean couldn't quite wash away. I stood on the deck of the cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold, the only passenger, a misplaced academic adrift in a sea of rust and indifference. My inheritance, a grand pronouncement from a solicitor whose voice crackled with the same indifference as the ship's radio. A manor, isolated, dilapidated, from a relative I'd never known, a name that felt like a whisper from a forgotten ledger. Marcus Thorne, my name. A strange echo across generations, a lineage I'd always suspected was as thin and frayed as the ropes binding the crates below. My academic life had been a slow, agonizing crawl through dusty archives, the hushed reverence of libraries, a poor substitute for the thrill of genuine discovery. I chased ghosts in footnotes, the forgotten whispers of local lore, the rituals that time had eroded into mere superstition. Colleagues saw it as a quaint eccentricity, a harmless diversion from the rigorous, quantifiable truths of established history. They didn't understand. They couldn't. This inheritance, then, was more than just property. It was a potential anchor, a tangible connection to something real, a chance to escape the sterile confines of my small apartment, the perpetual scent of stale coffee and desperation, and immerse myself in a place that might actually hold secrets. The solicitor had been vague, almost dismissive about the property itself. A large estate, he'd said, his gaze fixed on his polished mahogany desk. In a remote location. I'll need to arrange transport. He'd handed me a thick, wax-sealed envelope, the Thorne family crest embossed with a ferocity that belied its faded grandeur. Inside, a deed, a cryptic map, and a single brittle photograph of a sprawling Gothic structure choked by overgrown ivy. It looked less like a home and more like a forgotten monument, a sentinel guarding something it desperately wished to keep hidden. The journey here had been an experience. The cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold was a relic, groaning under the weight of its cargo and its own decrepitude. The crew, a handful of weathered men who moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of those who'd seen too many dawns break over empty horizons, communicated in grunts and nods. They treated me with a mixture of suspicion and a weary resignation, as if my presence was just another inexplicable anomaly in their monotonous existence. I'd spent days on deck, the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean my only companion. The rhythmic thrum of the engines was a constant, unsettling lullaby. I'd asked the captain, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard living, about the cargo. He'd simply shrugged, his eyes like chips of sea-worn glass. Just stuff, nothing for I to worry about. But there was something, a low, persistent hum that seemed to emanate from the bowels of the ship, a vibration that I felt more than heard, resonating in my bones. It was a sound that didn't belong to the sea or the ship or the wind. It was a sound that felt, ancient, and with it a smell. Not the expected brine and diesel, but something else. Something metallic, coppery, and faintly, sickeningly sweet. It was a scent that pricked at the edges of my memory. A phantom aroma that hinted at things best left undisturbed. The manor, I was told, was a further journey inland, accessible only by a winding, overgrown track. The solicitor had arranged for a local man to meet me, a silent, stoic figure who emerged from the swirling mist like a specter. He said nothing, his expression unreadable, as he gestured towards a battered, canvas-covered vehicle. The drive was a descent into a landscape that seemed to actively resist human habitation. Twisted trees clawed at the sky, their branches skeletal fingers. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of tires on gravel and the occasional, sharp cry of an unseen bird. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primal perfume that spoke of long winters and forgotten seasons. And then, through a break in the gnarled trees, I saw it. The manor. It wasn't just dilapidated. It was a ruin, a skeletal husk against the bruised twilight sky. Stone walls, stained with centuries of rain and neglect, sagged inwards. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. a testament to a forgotten ambition, a monument to a history that had clearly taken a turn for the worse. The local man stopped the vehicle at the edge of a choked, overgrown drive. He pointed towards the imposing structure, his gesture brief and final. Then, without a word, he turned the vehicle and disappeared back into the encroaching gloom, leaving me alone, utterly alone. It felt as though the very land around the manor held its breath, waiting. Waiting for what, for me? The wind, when it finally stirred, carried with it a faint, mournful sigh, a sound that seemed to coil around the ancient stones, promising secrets and perhaps something far worse. As I stepped out of the vehicle, the damp earth beneath my feet felt strangely yielding, almost soft, as if it had been disturbed recently. Had anyone else been here? And if so, where had they gone? The salt spray stung my face, a welcome jolt after hours adrift. The cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold, groaned beneath me, a tired beast of rust and brine. The captain, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard living, gestured with a calloused thumb towards the bruised horizon. "That's her," he rasped, his voice like grinding stones. "The old bird." I squinted. A smudge of grey against the churning sea, growing larger with agonizing slowness. It wasn't the manor I'd pictured. This was a husk. A skeletal silhouette against a sky the color of old bruises. The rumors, whispers passed down through generations of my family, spoke of a grand estate, a place of dark beauty. This was just decay. As we drew closer, the details sharpened, each one a fresh prick of unease. The stone was slick with a perpetual dampness, not just from the sea air, but from something deeper, something that seemed to weep from the very fabric of the place. Jagged peaks of slate jutted from the roof like broken teeth. Windows, most of them, were dark, hollow sockets, though a few glinted with a sickly yellow light, like diseased eyes. A single, impassably tall chimney stood sentinel, a gaunt finger pointing accusingly at the heavens. The captain cut the engines, and the ship fell silent, save for the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull and that persistent, bone-deep hum. It was louder now, a low thrumming that vibrated through the deck, up my legs, and into my chest. It felt like the ship itself was alive, breathing a slow, heavy breath. The smell, too, was more pronounced. Not just the sea, but something else, earthy, damp, and something faintly metallic like old blood. I tried to shake it off, the historian in me eager to catalogue, to analyze. But the primal part, the part that knew fear, was screaming for me to turn back. A small, barbing dinghy was lowered. The captain, the cook, and the engineer, the entirety of the cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold, living population, watched me with a mixture of curiosity and something I couldn't quite place. Resignation, perhaps, or maybe just a desire to be rid of the strange passenger and his unsettling cargo. My trunk, filled with books and research materials, felt heavier than it should. The journey to shore was short, the dinghy scraping against barnacle-encrusted rocks. The air here was thick, heavy with the scent of brine and something else, something sweet and cloying, like decaying flowers. The hum from the ship seemed to follow me, a phantom echo in the sudden stillness. I stood at the base of a crumbling stone wall, the manor looming above. Lichen, thick and velvety, clung to its surface, obscuring the mortar. It looked as though the earth itself had pushed this structure up, a monstrous growth of rock and despair. There was no gate, only a gap where one might have been, choked with thorny vines. I pushed them aside, the sharp barbs tearing at my jacket. The path beyond was little more than a scar on the overgrown land, leading to a massive oak door. It was warped, bowed, and scarred, as if it had weathered 1,000 storms, both natural and unnatural. I reached for the heavy iron handle. My breath hitched. The hum was back, fainter now, but definitely present. It seemed to come from within the manor. I pushed. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light that pierced the gloom from unseen cracks. The air was stagnant, stale, carrying the same damp, earthy scent, now laced with the faint, unsettling sweetness I'd noticed on the shore. A grand staircase, its banister intricately carved with what looked like tangled roots, swept upwards into the gloom. Strange symbols, worn smooth with age, were etched into the risers of the stairs. I ran a finger over one, feeling a faint, raised texture. They were unlike anything I'd ever encountered in my studies. Not runes, not hieroglyphs. Something older. Something hungry. To my left, a doorway led into what must have been a drawing room. The furniture was shrouded in dust sheets, ghostly white mounds in the dimness. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth choked with ash that looked disturbingly fresh. The air in here was particularly heavy, the sweet, cloying scent stronger. It made my head swim. I moved deeper, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the flagstone floor. The hum seemed to shift, to emanate from the very walls now, a low vibration that made my teeth ache. I paused, listening, or just the wind playing tricks. I strained my ears, but heard only the house sighing around me. I found myself in a long corridor, doors lined either side, each one identical in its worn, weathered appearance. I tried the first, locked. The second. The third, however, creaked open at my touch. It led to a study. Bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with ancient tomes, their spines cracked and faded. A heavy wooden desk sat in the center of the room, its surface littered with papers, inkwells, and what looked like a dried quill. But it was the floor that drew my attention. The flagstones here were different, smoother, and in the center of the room, directly beneath a cobweb-draped chandelier, was a circular pattern of inlaid stones. As I looked closer, I realized the pattern wasn't just decorative. It was deliberate, intentional, and it seemed to throb with a faint, internal light, a sickly phosphorescence that pulsed in time with the hum. What was this place built for? And why did the air taste of decay and honey? The salt spray stung my eyes, blurring the already indistinct outline of the island. The tugboat chugged along, a tired, wheezing thing spitting black smoke into the perpetual grey of the North Sea. This wasn't how I'd imagined arriving. The solicitors had been vague, mentioning a remote property and necessary conveyance. I'd pictured a car, perhaps a ferry to a quaint coastal town. Not this rusted metal beast carrying me towards a place that already felt like a mistake. The captain, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles and whose silence was as thick as the fog, hadn't spoken more than 10 words since we'd left the mainland. He'd pointed to the deck, grunted, and left me to my own devices. I was the only passenger. The rest were the cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold, a collective presence I felt more than saw, their movements a low thrumming beneath the deck, a guttural murmur of unseen labor. The manor, when we finally docked at a crumbling, barnacle-encrusted jetty, was even worse than the distant silhouette had suggested. It loomed, a Gothic silhouette against the bruised sky, its stone walls weeping dark streaks of damp. The air tasted of brine and decay, a cloying sweetness that clung to the back of my throat. The tugboat captain simply gestured towards the overgrown path leading inland, and then, without another word, cast off, leaving me with my single, battered suitcase and the oppressive silence of the island. The path was treacherous, choked with gnarled roots and slick with a moss that felt disturbingly like damp velvet under my worn boots. Each step was a gamble, a potential plunge into the unseen mire. I told myself it was just the wind, just the sea, just the isolation playing tricks on my mind. But the hairs on my arms prickled, a constant, low-grade awareness that I was not alone. The interior was a tomb. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy, leaded windows. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. Furniture lay draped in shrouds, ghostly lumps in the gloom. Days bled into a monotonous cycle of exploration and gnawing unease. I moved through the echoing rooms, my footsteps unnaturally loud, cataloging the decay. The library was my first real sanctuary, or so I'd hoped. Rows upon rows of leather-bound books, their spines cracked and faded, promised knowledge escape. But the pages were brittle, the ink faded, the language often archaic, impenetrable. Still, I persisted. I had to. This was my inheritance, my link to a family history I barely understood. It was in a small, unassuming study, tucked away behind a false bookshelf that I found it. Not a book, but a collection of loose papers, tied with a fraying ribbon. The handwriting was cramped, spidery, the ink a deep, unsettling brown. It was a journal, my great-aunt's perhaps, the one who had apparently bequeathed me this crumbling monument to misery. The early entries were mundane, detailing the weather, the garden, the loneliness. But as I turned the brittle pages, the tone shifted. And the calling begins. It is a song only the earth can hear, a rhythm only the deep roots can feel. They say it is for prosperity, for the land's bounty, but I have seen the cost. The cost? What cost? I scanned the pages, my breath catching in my throat. She spoke of a ritual, something ancient, tied to the very foundations of the manor. A sacrifice, not of animals, but of something more. Something that fed the land, that appeased the entity she referred to only as the Watcher. He demands a vessel, she wrote, the words blurred as if by tears. A willing soul, or one taken. The old ways are not dead. They merely sleep, waiting for the right season, the right hunger, and the hunger is growing. My gaze darted to the grimy window. The wind howled outside, a rising crescendo that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. It was a presence, a weight in the air, pressing down. The journal spoke of a cycle, of a reckoning. And I, Marcus, had just inherited the stage. Was the island's bounty truly worth such a price? And who or what was the Watcher waiting for? The journal's last word, covenant, hung in the frigid air of the study. A covenant. Not a curse, not a haunting, but a pact. The wind outside intensified, rattling the window panes like skeletal fingers. I shivered, pulling my cardigan tighter. It wasn't just the chill of the old house. It was a prickling on my skin, a sense of being observed. I dismissed it as nerves, the isolation, the sheer weight of the manor's history pressing down. But now, with that word echoing, the feeling solidified. It was watching. I traced the faded ink with a fingertip. The historian in me, the part that craved order and explanation, fought against the rising tide of unease. Folklore was just that, stories, myths woven from fear and imagination. Yet the details, the meticulous descriptions of the rituals, the fervent pleas for appeasement, the chilling certainty in the author's hand that something ancient and hungry resided here. A sudden, sharp crack from the floor above sent a jolt through me. My head snapped up. Just the wind, a mournful sigh now. I told myself it was the house settling, old timbers groaning under the strain of age and neglect. But the sound had been too distinct, too deliberate, like a heavy footfall. I stood, my knees stiff. The floorboards beneath my worn slippers creaked in protest. I needed to get out of this room. It felt thick, stale with secrets. I decided to explore the lower levels, perhaps find the old kitchen. A distraction, something mundane. Dust motes swirled in the weak shafts of moonlight that pierced the grimy panes of the landing window. Each step was amplified, a loud intrusion into the profound quiet. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and shallow. Downstairs, the layout was even more disorienting. The scent of decay was stronger here, a damp, earthy smell mixed with something acrid, like old, stagnant water. I pushed open a heavy oak door, revealing what must have once been a ballroom. Cobwebs draped like macabre decorations from the chandelier. A piano sat in the far corner, its keys a gaping, yellowed maw. Then I heard it, a low hum. It wasn't the wind. This was a resonant vibration, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. It thrummed in my chest, a disquieting counterpoint to my own frantic heartbeat. I froze, straining my ears. The hum grew, a pulsating drone that filled the vast space. It felt organic, alive. My gaze fell upon a large, tarnished mirror leaning against the far wall. It reflected the dim light, a distorted, hazy image of the room. As I watched, the hum seemed to intensify, and the mirror, it rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. My breath hitched. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. It was a trick of the light, I told myself. The old glass warped with age. But the rippling continued, a slow, viscous undulation across the reflective surface. And then, within the distortion, something began to form. But it coalesced, taking on a shape that was both familiar and utterly wrong. It was the outline of a figure, tall and gaunt, its features blurred, as if seen through a veil of smoke. It didn't move, not in the conventional sense, but its presence was palpable, a crushing weight that pressed against me, stealing the air from my lungs. The hum reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that seemed to vibrate my very bones. It was a skeletal, elongated limb, and it pointed directly at me. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a loose floorboard. I cried out, a strangled gasp that was swallowed by the overwhelming sound. My hands flew up, shielding my face, as if the mirror could somehow reach out and grasp me. The sound abruptly ceased. The rippling in the mirror stilled. The figure vanished. Only the warped reflection of the dusty ballroom remained. I stood trembling, my body rigid, my eyes wide, staring at the inert glass. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. I was no longer alone. The house was not just old and empty. It was inhabited, and whatever resided here knew I was here. It had shown itself, but why? What did it want? My thoughts raced, a jumbled mess of fear and frantic analysis. The journal mentioned a ritual, a sacrifice. Had I just witnessed the prelude, a warning, or had I, in my foolish curiosity, stumbled into something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined? I was a participant. I needed to leave, now. But where could I go? The roads were miles away, and the wind outside had only grown more ferocious. As if in answer, a new sound drifted from the depths of the house, a soft, rhythmic scraping. It was coming from the direction of the cellar, a sound like something being dragged across stone. And it was getting closer, or something else entirely. The word covenant echoed in the vast emptiness of the study, a cold, sharp sound swallowed by the rustle of decaying paper. I traced the faded ink, my fingertip catching on a minuscule raised bump, a tiny imperfection in the parchment that felt significant. It implied a negotiation, a bargain struck, not a random act of malevolence, but a deliberate exchange. The wind outside howled, a mournful cry that seemed to seep through the very stone of the manor. I hugged myself, the rough wool of my cardigan a small comfort against the encroaching unease. My breath plumed in the air, a visible testament to the manor's persistent chill. I needed more. It spoke of cycles, of appeasement, of a debt that demanded payment. But payment to whom and for what? I ran my fingers over the brittle pages, the scent of dust and something else, something faintly metallic and earthy, filling my nostrils. It was the smell of old blood, I realized with a sickening lurch. My gaze fell upon a series of sketches tucked into the back of the journal. They were crude, almost childlike, yet imbued with a disturbing energy. Twisted figures, their limbs elongated and contorted, seemed to writhe on the page. One depicted a central, swirling vortex, from which emanated long, grasping tendrils, a sacrifice. The word clawed its way to the forefront of my mind. The ritual. A sudden, violent gust slammed against the manor, shaking the foundations. A framed portrait of a stern-faced ancestor, hanging precariously on the wall, tilted and then crashed to the floor, the glass shattering like ice. I flinched, my heart leaping into my throat. It felt deliberate, a warning. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady. This house was not merely old. It was alive, and it was hostile. I had to leave, to get away from this suffocating atmosphere. But where? The nearest town was miles away, and I hadn't seen another soul since arriving. My car was still stalled on the rutted track, its engine stubbornly refusing to sputter to life. I needed a different approach. The journal hinted at the entity's origins, its connection to the land, but it was all veiled in metaphor and archaic language. I remembered a small, larked chest I'd found in the attic, tucked away beneath a pile of moth-eaten tapestries. It might contain something useful. The attic stairs creaked ominously with each step, the air growing thicker, heavier. Cobwebs, thick as carton batting, brushed against my face, and I swatted them away with a shudder. The lark was intricate, a series of interlocking tumblers. I fumbled with the small collection of keys I'd found on a hook near the study door, my hands trembling. The first few didn't fit. The third, a small, ornate key with a serpent's head for a handle, slid into the lock with a soft click. Inside, nestled on faded velvet lining, were not more journals, but a collection of peculiar artifacts. A small, intricately carved wooden effigy, its features worn smooth by time. A handful of dried, brittle herbs that released a pungent, acrid odor when disturbed. And a single, yellowed parchment, covered in a script I didn't recognize, but which pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible luminescence. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a series of sibilant hisses that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Panic seized me. I stumbled backward, my hands scrabbling for the chest. I could hear my own ragged breathing, a frantic counterpoint to the infernal murmur. I needed to escape. I needed to understand this. This thing that seemed to inhabit the very fabric of the manor. The journal, the artifacts, they were pieces of a puzzle, a terrifyingly complex one. But the entity, whatever it was, didn't want me to solve it. It wanted me to become part of it. My mind raced, desperate for a solution, a way out. Was there any way to break this covenant, or was I already bound to its terms? Suddenly, a new sound cut through the din, a rhythmic, metallic clanging, distant but distinct. It seemed to emanate from the direction of the coast, from the old, disused docks at the edge of the estate, a cargo ship. I remembered seeing the skeletal remains of one, listing precariously in the murky water, a ghost of its former self. What could that sound mean? Was it a signal, a distraction, or something else entirely, something that had also been drawn to this cursed place? It pulled at me, a siren song of an unknown possibility. The air in the study tasted of dust and something else, something metallic and sharp, like old blood. Word covenant sat on the page, a dark inkai stain against the brittle parchment. My breath hitched. A bargain, not a curse but a deal, an exchange. My fingers, raw from hours of sifting through mildewed documents, trembled as they traced the impassably faint lines of the script. The raised bump was still there, a tiny imperfection that spoke volumes. It wasn't just a pact, it was a binding agreement. The entity, whatever it was, hadn't simply taken. It had been given. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound I'd grown accustomed to, a restless sigh from the manor itself. It was louder tonight. The storm outside, a relentless drumming against the ancient glass, seemed to amplify the house's own groans. Rain lashed the windows, each gust of wind a frantic clawing. I glanced at the calendar, a relic I'd found tucked away in a desk drawer, its pages yellowed and stiff. The mark date, circled in a frantic, shaky hand, was today. My gaze snapped back to the document. The covenant spoke of cycles of appeasement. It detailed the necessity of the exchange, the land's insatiable hunger. The bump under my finger, I now realized, wasn't an imperfection. It was a seal, a sigil, and the ink. It wasn't ink at all. It was dried, impassably thin and faintly sticky. A sudden, sharp, cracking sound from the hallway sent a jolt through me. I froze, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. It was the house. It had to be. The old timbers settling, the wind playing tricks. But the metallic tang in the air seemed to thicken, to coalesce. It was the smell of anticipation. I pushed myself away from the desk, the creak of my chair unnervingly loud. The study, usually a sanctuary of sorts, now felt like a trap. The shadows in the corners, usually benign, seemed to stretch and writhe with a life of their own. I could feel it, a prickling sensation on my skin, the feeling of being watched, not by eyes, but by something far older, far more fundamental. The hum intensified, a deep thrumming that resonated in my bones. It was coming from below, the old cellar. I'd avoided it, of course. The air down there was always heavy, stagnant, carrying the faint, unsettling scent of damp earth, and something else I couldn't quite place a sweetness, cloying and sickly. I grabbed the kerosene lamp from the desk, its flickering light a pathetic defense against the encroaching gloom. My hands were slick with sweat. The covenant, the exchange. It wasn't just about the land, it was about me. The relative who'd left me this place, the one whose name I barely recalled, had been the last in a long line of custodians of offerings. And now the cycle had brought it to me. The cellar door, a heavy slab of oak bound with rusted iron, stood at the end of the hallway. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this accursed place. But where would I go? The entity was tied to the land, to the covenant. It would find me. It always found its due. The storm outside seemed to pause, a momentary lull in the rain's fury. In that stillness I heard it. A faint, rhythmic scraping sound from within the cellar, like something being dragged, slowly, deliberately. My hand, as if guided by an unseen force, reached for the iron ring that served as a handle. I pulled. The sickly sweet smell was stronger now, overpowering, and the scraping sound, it was closer. The cellar was larger than I'd imagined, the stone walls slick with moisture. And there at the far end, illuminated by the wavering light, was a makeshift altar, and upon it, a shape, or what had once been human, a skeletal frame draped in tattered rags, and beside it, a shallow, circular trench carved into the earth. The scraping stopped. It wasn't a voice I'd heard before, yet it felt intimately familiar, like a forgotten fear surfacing from the depths of my subconscious. The covenant is to be honored, Marcus. My breath caught in my throat. It knew my name. The land demands its due. The cycle must continue. I stumbled back, my foot catching on something. I looked down. It was a small, tarnished silver locket lying half buried in the damp earth. I recognized it. It had belonged to the relative who'd left me the manor. I'd found it in a box of their belongings. The bargain was struck generations ago. I am the inheritor. I am the offering. My eyes darted around the cellar, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything, but there was nothing. Only stone, damp earth, and the skeletal remains on the altar, the trench. Then my gaze fell upon the small, raised bump on the parchment back in the study. The sigil, the seal. It wasn't just a mark of agreement. It was a point of leverage. The covenant was a negotiation, and negotiations could be renegotiated. A new scent mingled with the metallic tang and the sickly sweetness. The sharp, acrid smell of ozone. A storm was building, not just outside, but within the very fabric of this place. The entity was tethered to the covenant, to the ritual. If I could disrupt the ritual, could I break the covenant? The scraping sound began again, this time from behind me, from the doorway. The heavy oak door, which I had left ajar, was slowly, deliberately creaking shut. The tide has turned, the reckoning has come. But I saw it then, a glint of metal near the altar. A ceremonial dagger, its blade dulled with age but still sharp enough. It lay half hidden in the dirt. A weapon, a tool, a sacrifice. The hum was deafening now, a physical pressure against my eardrums. The smell of ozone was overpowering. It is time. My hand closed around the hilt of the dagger. The metal was strangely warm. Was there a way to offer something else? Something that would satisfy the land without satisfying the hunger of the entity? Or was my only choice to become the sacrifice? The air crackled. A faint, phosphorescent glow began to emanate from the trench, illuminating the skeletal figure on the altar. The glow pulsed, growing brighter, more insistent. It was a beacon, drawing something or preparing something. The sacrifice. The land. The entity. I held the dagger, its weight a stark reality in my trembling hand. Could I rewrite the terms of a bargain struck in blood and earth, centuries before I was born? A low, guttural growl. It wasn't the entity. It was something else. Something that had been lurking in the hold of the cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold, waiting. And it was hungry. There was this my salvation, or a far worse fate. The phosphorescent glow intensified, not from the dagger, but from the very walls of the study. It pulsed, a sickly, greenish light that bled through the peeling wallpaper, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. My grip tightened on the dagger, its warmth spreading through my palm, a phantom heat that felt less like comfort and more like a brand. This was it, the culmination, the offering, but what offering? The folklore whispered of blood, of life, of a soul tethered to the soil. I wasn't a scholar of ancient rites for nothing. I'd pored over brittle pages, deciphered faded script, all leading to this suffocating certainty. The entity craved a connection, a vessel, a life to anchor its restless existence. And the land, the hungry earth beneath the manor, demanded its due. My gaze swept the room, landing on the heavy oak desk. Scrawled across its surface were my notes, a chaotic testament to weeks of sleepless nights and gnawing fear. The symbols, the fragmented incantations, the chilling accounts of previous inhabitants who had simply vanished. They were all here, a morbid tapestry of my descent. The glow pulsed again, stronger this time. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within my bones. It was the sound of anticipation, the sound of a trap sprung. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. The air was thick, cloying, smelling of damp earth and something else. Something metallic, carpery, the scent of old blood. There was that the offering the land craved. Or was it my blood? Dagger felt heavier now, a leaden weight in my hand. It spoke my name. Marcus. It wasn't a voice, not in the way I understood voices. It was a thought, ancient and vast, imprinted directly onto my consciousness. It promised oblivion, or perhaps a terrible kind of belonging. My fingers traced the intricate carvings on the dagger's hilt. They depicted intertwined vines, thorny branches, and a single, gaping maw at the pommel. A symbol of consumption. A symbol of sacrifice. The warmth intensified, a prickling sensation under my skin. It felt like the dagger was alive, its heat a predatory caress. Was there another way? A loophole in the ancient pact? I'd read about appeasement, about gifts that satisfied the primal needs of such entities. But what could I, a mere historian, offer that would be deemed sufficient? My knowledge, my life's work. It felt laughably inadequate against the weight of centuries of demand. The hum deepened, a guttural thrumming that made the teacups on a nearby shelf rattle. The glow brightened to an almost blinding intensity, forcing me to squint. My palms were slick with sweat, the dagger threatening to slip from my grasp. Then a thought, sharp and sudden, pierced the fog of my fear. The cargo ship, the crew, they spoke of a strange artifact unearthed from some forgotten dig. Something they were transporting for an anonymous client. Something that pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. Something that had made the crew uneasy, their dreams plagued by unsettling visions. Could that be it? A different offering, something that belonged to the entity, or at least something that resonated with its primal nature. The folklore was vague on specifics, on the nature of the sacrifice, only its necessity. It spoke of a transfer, a transference of essence. My eyes darted to the window, to the moonless sky. The manor was isolated, miles from any town. The nearest sign of civilization was the distant glimmer of lights from the port, the restless breathing of the sea. And the cargo ship, a hulking silhouette against the inky blackness, its skeleton crew no doubt oblivious to the drama unfolding within the manor's walls. The entity's presence pressed closer, a suffocating weight. I could feel its ancient hunger, its impatience. It was a vast, cosmic indifference, a force of nature that cared nothing for my hopes or my fear. It simply was, and it demanded. My gaze fell back to the dagger. The carving seemed to shift, to writhe, the more at the pommel appearing to widen. The warmth radiating from it was no longer just a sensation. It was a hunger. It mirrored the hunger in the room, the hunger in the land. What if the artifact on the cargo ship was already tainted, already a conduit? What if bringing it here, offering it as a substitute would be enough? But the alternative was unthinkable. The phosphorescent glow reached its zenith, painting the study in an unearthly light. The hum became a deafening roar, a cacophony of ancient energies. I could feel the entity reaching out, its tendrils of influence probing, seeking purchase. It was ready. My breath hitched. My hand trembled, not just from fear, but from a burgeoning resolve. I wouldn't be the sacrifice. Not like this. Not without a fight. But the cargo ship was miles away. The entity was here now. How could I possibly reach it in time? What if the artifact was already lost, or worse, already consumed by the entity's influence? There was the dagger, the only key, and was it meant to be plunged into flesh, or something else entirely? The air thrummed, waiting for my decision, for my final, desperate act. The salt spray tasted like ash on my tongue. I leaned against the cold, corrugated steel of the cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold. The waves slapped against the hull, a monotonous, insistent rhythm that had become the soundtrack to my new existence. It had been months, or maybe years, since I'd last seen the dust-choked study of Blackwood Manor. Time had become a fluid thing, as unreliable as the fog that perpetually clung to the docks. The air here was thick with the metallic tang of brine and the underlying, unsettling smell of something old, something that had been sealed away for too long. It reminded me, in a way I couldn't quite articulate, of the manor's cellar, that damp, earthy scent that clung to my clothes even after I'd scrubbed myself raw. I'd thought I was clean. I'd been wrong. My hands, calloused now from hauling ropes and scrubbing decks, still sometimes trembled. Not from fear, not exactly. It was more like a phantom ache, a ghost of the terror that had once consumed me. I'd fled Blackwood Manor, the dagger still clutched in my sweaty palm, its strange warmth a persistent memory against my skin. I hadn't looked back. I couldn't. I'd boarded the first ship I could find, a grimy freighter bound for nowhere in particular. The captain, a grizzled man with eyes that had seen too much ocean, had taken me on without asking questions. We were a skeleton crew, each of us carrying our own silent burdens, our own reasons for wanting to disappear. My secret was heavier than any cargo. The cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold. It was a place to hide, a place to forget. But the forgetting was the hardest part. The folklore I'd once studied with such academic detachment had become terrifyingly real. The rituals, the sacrifices, the entities that dwelled in the liminal spaces of the world, they weren't just stories anymore. I remembered the final moments in the study. The dagger, its heat intensifying, not just in my hand, but radiating from the very air around me. The walls seemed to breathe, the peeling wallpaper rippling as if a hidden tide were pulling at it. I had seen something then, a flicker in the periphery of my vision, a shape that defied geometry, a presence that was both everywhere and nowhere. It was the entity, the thing that had been awakened, the hunger that had been sated for centuries and was now stirring. My role in all of this had been a terrible accident. I had sought knowledge, and I had found a truth that was far more terrifying than any myth. Now I existed in a perpetual state of unease. The vastness of the ocean was supposed to be liberating, a blank canvas to erase the past. But even here, surrounded by an endless expanse of grey water, the feeling of being trapped persisted. It was the same claustrophobia I'd felt in the narrow corridors of Blackwood Manor, the same sense of being observed by unseen eyes. The sailors on this ship were quiet, efficient. They spoke little, their faces weathered and etched with the hardships of their lives. We were all trying to outrun something, though none of us dared to name it. One of the sailors, a younger man with vacant eyes, approached me. He held out a chipped tin mug. "Coffee," he rasped, his voice rough as sandpaper. He just nodded, his gaze distant, as if he were looking through me or perhaps at something far beyond the horizon. We were all haunted in our own ways. My haunting was just a little more visceral. I took a sip of the coffee. It burned my throat. The taste was almost as unsettling as the memory of the phosphorescent glow. I looked out at the churning sea, the endless waves crashing against the hull. Had I truly escaped? The entity, the hunger, it was still out there, I knew it. Or perhaps if it was simply waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for me to stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for me to finally break. The ship pitched violently, a sudden lurch that sent a cascade of water over the deck. I gripped the railing, my grip tight. The sound of the waves seemed to intensify, no longer a monotonous rhythm, but a roar, a hungry roar. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but the green light pulsed behind my lids. Was it the memory, or was it something more? Something that had followed me across the ocean, clinging to me like the sea salt, its tendrils reaching out from the depths, even here, on the open water. The cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold. Was it truly a sanctuary, or just another cage?